There's an interesting extra use case of Essence that emerged relatively recently and wasn't one that we had particularly thought was too important until we started to think about it. And it actually fits really well with Essence. It's a bit complementary to some of the other benefits of Essence around empowered teams, picking and mixing practices, and that kind of building up from the ground rather than tailoring down, because it's about compliance. So what do we mean by compliance? What kinds of things do highly compliant industries require? Well, they typically require processes and practices to be defined, for teams to learn them, and for teams to apply them. Now, Essence helps us with all three of these things. The first one, if we actually author practices in Essence, then that gives us a really clear way to be absolutely precise over what it is that we mean when we say this is how you should work. So if you think back to the authoring, Essence allows us to be consistent and coherent, and it gives a strong purpose to the things that we do. So when you create a practice in Essence, you're forced to create a good practice that is less ambiguous than it might be if it was just free written in a document. And it also gives you quite a lot of hooks for ensuring you're applying it properly and applying it well, which is the second point. So defining how teams should use them, we can mix and match a little bit, but we can still provide some structure around that. So for example, you might have one set of practices that are recommended for teams that are, for example, in a research setting, a different set of practices for teams building products that are customer facing. And then we can build training around those practices quite nicely. And then the last bit is about showing how they're being used. So if we have good practices and those practices have states and they've got, in essence terms, alphas, so we've got things we care about, which might be to do with compliance, it might be about approvals, it might be about the specifics of what data is used to test or to validate solutions, but we can show that teams are using them because we can see checklists being ticked, we can see states being progressed, and we can see that teams are interacting with the practices. So Essence allows us to touch all three of those points. We can define practices properly using Essence and be confident that those practices are sensible, that they work well together, and they've got purpose. We can use the benefits of Essence and the ability to really empower teams to learn the practices well through serious games and through the way that Essence has defined breaking the practices up through its different elements. So we can have a high confidence that not just are people reading some documents about the practices, but by being taught them properly, that knowledge has been retained. And finally, we can see that teams are interacting with the practices, they're using them well, we can track the state, we can see checklists, and we might even see who has ticked checklists, and maybe we attach things that provide evidence that that checklist has been fulfilled properly. So for example, if I tick a checklist that says the design has been accredited by a security professional or a chief architect, then maybe I can put a link to where that approval is kept, whether it's inside another system or whether it's in a document. So there's a few ways that Essence really supports compliance, and it's based on the way that Essence is built, with these sensibly coherent structured practices and measuring progress by state and checklist.